talk to us a little bit about the Office of the Inspector General when it relates to what you are responsible for doing when it comes to the U.S. postal system.
Yeah, we do oversight of the Postal Service. We are mostly a law enforcement and audit entity, so we do investigations of primarily postal employees that are engaged in misconduct or audits of the Postal Service operations.
Today we're talking about arrow keys specifically, but I want to ask you something about the Field Operations Review Audit Team. When was that formed?
We've had that going on for probably 3.5, 4 years now. I think it was right at the beginning of COVID that we started that team. And we've been doing those field operations reviews since, they're basically reviews of local operations in various locations. We look for very specific things when we go out and look, and it's focused mostly on service to the American public.
Okay. So before the audit team was formed, how were arrow keys tracked?
Postal Service tracks the arrow keys, so they're in their operations. They're responsible for accounting for the arrow keys, and each day the supervisor assigns an arrow key as needed to the carrier, and they do their delivery operations and bring it back. And the way it's supposed to work is they're supposed to return it to the supervisor, who secures it for overnight for the next day.
And if that doesn't happen, what's supposed to happen?
There's supposed to, if a key doesn't return back at the end of the day, it's supposed to be reported lost or stolen. And sometimes that happens and sometimes it doesn't.
Do we have a sense of how often it doesn't happen?
Well, what we know is in 2023 we did a review of the Postal Service's response to the mail theft issue. And one of the things that we did in that project is that we looked at accountability over arrow keys, and we looked at 16 delivery units to see how they were accounting for the arrow keys that were assigned to those units. And they had, I think it was about 550 arrow keys that should have been assigned to the 16 delivery units. And we did what auditors do. We did an inventory of those arrow keys to see how many were there. What we found was they were missing 155 of those keys. So more than a quarter of the keys were not there. And so then we looked to see, had these keys been reported as lost or stolen, and we found that more than 90%, about 140 of those 155 keys that were missing, had not been reported as lost or stolen. So it's not happening consistently around the country.
Why is that a problem?
It's a problem because the keys are critical to mail security. So the keys are used to open and close, lock the blue collection boxes that the Postal Service has around the country. They're also used to when a carrier delivers to a cluster box, which is at many housing developments and communities and apartment complexes where there are multiple mailboxes together. They're called cluster boxes. Those keys are used to open and lock those cluster boxes.
How old is this technology?
I don't even know, but it's at least 20th century, probably 19th or 18th century technology. It's a key and a lock, and the key, if you see a key, they're very antiquated. So yeah, that's a good bit of the problem. But the Postal Service is a massive operation. Everything is at scale. We're talking millions and millions of arrow locks and keys, and so it's challenging to replace that number of locks and keys.
Given, however, how valuable these collection boxes are in terms of what's in them, right? The American people use the Postal Service to mail out checks, to receive IRS refund checks, to receive credit cards, debit cards, personal information like W-2s. Given how sensitive the mail service is, the contents of these boxes, shouldn't we have a better process in place already to protect it from criminals?
I completely agree, which is why we made the initial recommendation in 2020 that they modernize their solutions for securing the mail, and they've started to do so, but it's going to be a massive operation, and we recommended in our 2023 report that they put together an implementation plan for the modernization of these locks, along with the other things that they're doing to address the mail theft problem. But that's a key part of the solution. That, along with accountability of the arrow keys themselves, and really aggressively investigating and prosecuting mail theft when it does occur.
Is that happening?
In some cases it is. I know the inspection service is taking this issue on, but it's a massive problem, and I think really focusing on pursuing these crimes as they occur is going to be really important, and publicizing when those prosecutions occur so that people know that this is a crime and it's not going to go unpunished.
Ultimately, who is responsible for securing these keys?
The Postal Service operations is responsible for accountability over the arrow keys themselves. They're out in every delivery unit, and the supervisors over those delivery units every day have to take on the responsibility to account for the arrow keys.
We did find a report going back as far as 1999, an audit that mentioned the vulnerability of arrow keys. Why has it taken so long to get around to this issue?
That's a great question. I think probably the scale of the solution has been a little challenging for the Postal Service to take on. It's like anything when there's a million things to do. You have to start somewhere, and I think what we're really pushing for is to identify where the hot spots are and at least begin there and start modernizing the technology associated with the locks in the places where mail theft is happening in large scale. So addressing that issue, I think would at least start impacting the mail theft issue.
And obviously, we understand that the OIG can only really make recommendations, but is there anything more that you can do to press USPS to move more swiftly on this issue?
I think doing follow-up work like these mail theft specific location reviews to see how that's going, and continuing to talk about it, continuing to raise this issue, and to make sure that the American public knows how seriously we at the OIG take mail security.
And if the OIG were designing a perfect system for maintaining and securing arrow keys, what would that look like?
It would probably not be arrow keys. So I think that's part of the issue. But if you have to do until they can modernize the entire system, I think you have to have some devices or something where it's easy. In the supervisor and the carriers know it's the expectation. It's not something that you have to sort of even think about, that it happens on a daily basis.
One thing that we asked was when the rollout of these new electronic locking systems would be rolled out. All that we were told was tens of thousands of them have already been rolled out in all 50 states, but there's no clear timeline. How much of a problem is that?
I think that's a significant problem. That was our first finding in our report, in our 2023 report, is that you really need a rollout plan. You need to follow it. You need to implement these according to a schedule and something that people can rely on. So we made that recommendation to the Postal Service. And one of the reasons that we decided to do some follow-on work in specific locations where there are hotspots is to see how that's happening, how that rollout of these modern electronic locks is going. And again, our first one in Queens should be out hopefully in a couple months.
Ultimately, how do we solve this problem?
It's a great question. I know three big things that we're recommending to help solve the problem, and it's not going to completely do away with it. But modernizing the locks is a big step towards that. Again, until that can happen everywhere, accountability for these arrow keys is critical. And then finally, I think aggressively pursuing, investigating, and prosecuting mail theft is a very important piece of this, because when the crime occurs, there needs to be some consequences.